You guys have 6 minutes to start.
So human functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI, informs the understanding of the neural basis of mental function. It is beginning to redefine how we diagnose, define, and understand disorders of consciousness. It is also at the center of debate surrounding the importance of neuroscience findings for concepts such as personhood and free will, and the extent of their practical consequences. Overall, fMRI is considered an increasingly popular method for studying the functional anatomy of the human brain. The domains in which fMRI can be applied are diverse, ranging from language comprehension to short-term memory, personality traits, political behavior, or aesthetic judgment. It can tell when you tell a lie, fall in love, what economic decisions you make. It can be used to establish guilt or innocence, tell what happens when you make a costly mistake, and tell what choice you are intending to make. One important thing to note is that the above domains I have described are scientific, published findings. These are not theoretical implications for the future, but things fMRI is capable of telling us in a research setting now. fMRI can be used to tell us tons of things of interest and correlates of brain activity during certain behaviors, thoughts, choices, etc., and can tell us real things about what is going on in a person's brain. The argument at hand is whether fMRI represents an invasion of privacy. So with that in mind, I ask, would you want someone to know the aforementioned things about you? We believe and will argue that fMRI does represent an invasion of privacy now, not only in a research setting, but in the public realm, military, and court settings. In a lab or academic setting, one might think fMRI could never be an invasion of privacy. After all, participants fill out consent forms and are later informed of what the researchers were looking for in the study and the results that were found. However, there are definite ways that neuroimaging can invade privacy even in a lab. In a research setting, there is one main issue making fMRI an invasion of privacy: incidental findings. Some of you may not know about these, or that they even exist. It is important for us to realize that the prevalence of incidental findings, or findings that tell us something about a person that they did not know and that was not being searched for, is higher than one would think. Incidental findings during fMRI for non-clinical purposes are a typical problem derived from such expanded human brain research under non-clinical conditions. Some of us may have heard of extreme circumstances, maybe from a graduate student who works in an imaging lab, where a subject came in and was scanned, and the student noticed something abnormal, like a lobe or maybe even an entire hemisphere of their brain missing. It turns out that this is not something that only happens 1 in a million times, but more like at least 13% of the time when you include clinical scans. If you are scanning someone's brain and realize they have some condition they are not aware of that is not affecting them, or a condition that will affect them in the future or could be already, like a tumor, what do you do? Studies report that neuroimagers themselves feel these ethical issues regarding incidental findings and the transfer of this knowledge are not dealt with adequately. If you discover an incidental finding, what do you do? When and how do you inform the participant? If knowing something about someone's brain, which is inseparable from their personhood and consciousness, is not an invasion of privacy, what is? It is also important to think about fMRI use in the public realm. Privatized imaging is an ever-growing industry, being used from diagnostic screens to non-medical services such as lie detection. The rules of buying a scan are not great, and at times the pressure to have a scan can be high. We need to remember that these scans are available for people to get whenever they want if they can pay for them, or if they want their child to get one, for example. Research is and has been done on the development of cognitive and behavioral traits in children, and this information can be used by parents and teachers to help with problems from dyslexia to drug abuse. If a parent can buy a scan for their child whenever they want, will they or should they be able to? Would you want a scan that provided information affirming your child's giftedness or the possibility of a brain disease preventing cognitive development, but for which there is no cure? Who makes the decision for this child? Is it only their guardian, and can they make whatever decision they want regardless of the wants of the child? It is obviously an invasion of privacy for a parent or fMRI technician to scan a child's brain to find things about them that they do not want people to know. We also need to realize that every time a publication comes out that is transferring knowledge about fMRI to the public, they are learning something about their brains. Here are some examples of headlines in the public. Justice may be hardwired into the human brain. Brain area blamed for stress disorders. School bullies. Is the amygdala to blame? There are definite dangers for interpreting and misinterpreting neuroimaging data. We need to remember that fMRI data is highly processed, and there is a definite issue with the public believing that correlation is causation. We know, as scientists, that one brain area is never strictly involved in one thing, but can we honestly say that we might not think differently about a human subject that has some inherent activation or deactivation of a certain brain region, even though we know that it is not conclusive proof or really mean anything? Isn't that an invasion of privacy? Everything I have spoken of are current issues with fMRI, but we need to remember that although fMRI is a technology that is not being used much above these capabilities now, its advancement is not something we will be waiting decades for. It has a place in military use, especially for interrogation, and who knows how far advanced military research is. It also has a place in the courtroom. There are arguments for fMRI being used as a lie detector, some saying it will be used only for proving innocence, but no one can argue that if they believe they are detecting a lie, they won't investigate that. People argue that this is not conclusive, but a polygraph is not conclusive and is often used even though it's not admissible in court. Since the boom of sequencing the genome, it is understood that our genes are sacred and private, for no one but ourselves. Are our minds not as private as our genes? Your mind is much more a part of who you are than your genetics, and that merits at least the same protection. Done.
Right in time.
So go to clear, or go back on the bottom left.
Okay, well, you started out talking about fMRI as it informs science and as it informs our understanding of how we as human beings work. You listed for about a third of your time all of the great things that fMRI has done. I thought I'd just make that statement once again. Do you disagree that after having made those grand statements about the uses of fMRI, that there aren't such grand uses of fMRI?
Well, I'll say two things. The first thing is that the argument in question is not whether fMRI should be used or is good and bad. It's whether it's an invasion of privacy and whether precautions should be taken, because it is one. The second thing I'll say is that all the things I listed, although you're saying that they're grand uses that are things that we know now from fMRI, which is in some cases true, most of the things I said, things like whether you're telling a lie, what your intentions are to do, what you're thinking, like your economic decisions, things like that are, yeah, grand things, but things with very high implications that need to be thought about.
So, do you think that it's important for us not to know these things?
No, I did not. No, I don't think that I ever said that either. It's important to understand that this is something that can be known about us from a scan, and that we need to take that into account when we're deciding how and when to use.
So you're saying that the implications of what you're saying are that we should go ahead and continue to investigate these types of topics?
Yeah, and that's not the question.
Okay, but that, I mean, you're saying that
Yeah.
we should go ahead
Yeah,
and
no, of course. fMRI, like I said, tells us the neural basis of our functions and is definitely very helpful in a research and a clinical setting. And I don't think I said anything that argues that it's not.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think you just brought up a point in your previous statement about how the uses of fMRI is not what's at debate. And so depending on how it's going to be applied, wouldn't that determine whether it is an invasion of privacy when you're looking at those certain questions and not fMRI in general?
Yes, it can, which is why we need to
But
think about those things.
the statement is that fMRI itself, not the uses like you just stated what the question was, not the uses of fMRI, but that fMRI represents an invasion of privacy.
And it is, because it can tell us all of these things about ourselves, even if we don't want to.
Depending on the use of it.
No, I said, like, in a research setting, when you get a scan, what if there's an incidental finding? What if you look at a region of the brain, even though you're looking at X region, you look at Y?
13% of findings are
At least 13%.
Yeah, but you're saying 13% is the ballpark figures.
Well, the figure I found went much higher, but I decided to say the lower range because I didn't want to.
All right, so, I mean, so the number we've been given is around 13%.
Right.
Would you be able to say explicitly that functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, represents an invasion of privacy with no caveats or exceptions? fMRI is a non-invasive technique for imaging the activation of brain areas for different types of physical sensation or activity. fMRI has revolutionized the field of medicine and cognitive research. In a Nature's Review article on fMRI, several clinical applications were stated. The first being pre-surgical mappings. fMRI can assess changes in relative blood oxygenation, which can guide a neurosurgeon to spare brain tissue that, if injured, would cause new clinical defects or limit good recovery in a patient. So how does one say to a patient that fMRI represents an invasion of their privacy when it could be used in helping better their recovery? Next, fMRI has been used in revolutionizing epilepsy care and understanding. In combination with EEG, fMRI can image the brain in order to localize the source of seizure-inducing activity in epilepsy. So would you say to an epileptic that we cannot use fMRI because it serves as an invasion of their privacy? fMRI has also been used to aid in understanding the genesis of certain symptoms. For example, in the study of pain, which is an important pathway to look for, it's used to provide a rationale for treatment approaches. It's also been used in pharmacodynamic applications, where it's looked at to be seen if it could play a role in drug development. With several psychiatric diseases, responses to treatment are variable. Only 70% of patients respond well to a given antidepressant. Using fMRI, we can see which patients would be able to respond better to certain treatments. At the end of the article, they did state that there remain practical problems that need to be resolved before fMRI can be used routinely in many clinical applications because of signal changes, which are small, and many confounding factors affecting the signal-to-noise ratio and variable responses in some applications, which we agree with. Nevertheless, the use and need for fMRI is clear. Currently, there are many constraints of fMRI that protect individuals which receive them. In the clinical setting, patients are covered from a violation of their privacy by HIPAA. HIPAA privacy rule provides federal protections for personal health information held by covered entities and gives patients an array of rights with respect to that information. At the same time, the privacy rule is balanced to permit disclosure of that information when it's needed for patient care, as well as other important purposes. In the research spectrum, there is IRB approval as well as consent needed from subjects. In addition to IRB approval is the Belmont report, which sets the ethical principles for using humans in research as research subjects. The first of these is respect of persons, which requires and includes consent. Human subjects research that is conducted or supported by a federal department or agency that does not meet the criteria for exemption or is regulated by the FDA is subject to review and approval by an IRB. In order to approve research, an IRB must determine that the specific criteria have been satisfied. Among these criteria, an IRB must determine that when appropriate, the research protocol includes adequate provisions to protect the privacy of subjects and to maintain the confidentiality of data. Research involving fMRI on subjects would not qualify for exemption. Also, consent is required. In consent, a subject has to be informed in a written and clear way in everyday language of which they can understand. In the legal realm, we have the Bill of Rights, which includes amendments on privacy that include privacy of the person and possessions as against unreasonable searches, and the privilege against self-incrimination, which provides protection for the privacy of personal information. These same principles that govern all research and medical and personal endeavors apply to fMRI. For example, blood tests. When your blood is drawn for an HIV test or any other test, the leftover blood cannot be used to study something that has not already been pre-approved. Many places let you know what will either be done with the remainder of the blood if it's not discarded. You are given this information before your blood is drawn, and then you sign on the line and you consent to what they've told you that they're going to do with it, and it's legal for them to do anything else. It's unreasonable to think that fMRI will be exempt from the procedures that govern current research endeavors. Finally, invasion of privacy is a legal claim that another person or business has illegally used someone's likeness or unjustifiably intruded into that person's personal affairs. Examples of invasion of privacy include using someone's likeness for commercial advantage, public disclosure of private facts, putting someone else in false light in the public, and intrusion into someone's private affairs. With all the guidelines on human subject research as well as privacy regulations on health information, it's impossible for fMRI to represent an invasion of privacy. In terms of illegal uses, a telephone can represent an invasion of a person's privacy if it's used to eavesdrop into someone else's conversation. However, in the way many of us use it, it's used as a device to connect family and friends, Just because a device can be used inappropriately does not mean that it should not be used in an inappropriate way. More practically, fMRI use requires multidisciplinary knowledge as well as lots of money. fMRI studies utilize knowledge in several fields, including physics, psychology, neuroanatomy, statistics, and electrophysiology. So to think that a person will possess all these different skills and be able to foot the lofty cost of an fMRI experiment, the MR scan being $1.5 million, a suite being $500,000, and the actual procedure being around $3,000, is highly improbable and unrealistic. fMRI has revolutionized the possibilities of research in medicine, and there are current regulations on fMRI to protect individuals' privacy. Can you present a legal use of fMRI that is currently being used that is an invasion of privacy? Probably not. However, there are numerous examples of patients who have had successful outcomes due to preoperative fMRIs that aid their neurosurgeons in guiding their care. Thus, fMRI does not represent an invasion of privacy.
Yep, I'm ready. So, okay. So first I want to say that we're not arguing that fMRI should not be used if it's used appropriately, which is what you said, that it should be used if it's used appropriately. And the question at hand is if fMRI is an invasion of privacy, and if it can be an invasion of privacy, then
It's not if it can be, but if it is an invasion.
Yeah, if it is an invasion of
yes.
privacy, and because it is, then you need to take appropriate actions. For example, you said that what if okay. Is it an invasion of privacy with no caveats or exceptions? So what invasion of privacy do you know of that does not have a caveat or exception in the legal field today? Like search and seizure or tapping someone's phone? All of these things have a caveat. Or is that not true?
I don't understand your question. Are you saying
Do you
that,
know of something in legally that is considered an invasion of privacy that does not have a caveat or exception?
I think my statement started off with that you can't say explicitly that fMRI represents an invasion of privacy. And then the way
But you said with no caveats or exceptions. But what invasion of privacy doesn't have an exception?
Searches and seizures are illegal. You cannot go in and you can't go in and just search somebody's private domain. It is mandated in our Bill of Rights that it's illegal to
Yeah,
go in and
if
just search
that
something.
person, yeah, unless it's an unlawful search, which you can have, and also it says that the person has to have the expectation of privacy in order for it to be illegal for you to do that. So if you have probable cause, you can enter someone's house.
So,
But that's a caveat. So the first statement was that you can't say it's an invasion of privacy without exceptions, but there are exceptions to invading someone's privacy. A lot of the things you talked about, Kim's going to talk about, but for instance, if you were...
so what you're talking about though is you're directly pointing to a search, which is in and of itself an invasion of privacy.
Yes.
fMRI is completely different. It is a tool.
Well, I'm not comparing them. I'm saying that your statement was that you can't say it's an invasion of privacy without an exception, but tons of invasions of privacy have exceptions.
Searches are illegal. There are legal means to do that, which are not invasions then of privacy. An invasion is something that happens illegally, that happens without due course, that happens without the boundaries of what we as a society have accepted as the rights of individuals. If a person goes through these boundaries of society and says, now we have justifiably done this act, then it is not then an invasion because it is universally within this nation accepted as a plausible, practical act of volition.
Yeah, I think what you're getting at, you're taking a legal definition and using that as an ethical definition. I don't think they're necessarily one and the same. So I think you can have...
An ethical perspective is definitely what we do in the legal realm.
I mean, you have all this stuff. We're already going to find out. So okay, it's my turn, right?
Let me know when you guys are ready.
Start whenever you're ready. You want to refute first or talk?
Invasions of privacy as invasions of privacy.
Okay, yeah.
Like the current protocol.
All right, so one thing that I really want to point out is that you guys brought up and talked for a long time about informed consent and reassuring people that this information will be kept confidential. And we're not talking about, I just wanted to point out that privacy is not the same thing as confidentiality. So you can know, what am I trying to say here? So you can know information about how someone's brain works, and even if you don't know the name of that person, you don't know who the individual is, it's still an invasion of privacy. Like if you shared a database, a data set. Also, even if you have informed consent, you have informed consent to examine one process or one disorder or one part of the brain. You have a specific question that you're looking at. But when you take an fMRI scan, it's a picture of just global activation of what everything that's going on. And as a researcher or a tech using the scanner, you can't not see the other parts of the brain while you're looking at this. And the other thing is you seem to make a big deal about whether using fMRI is ethical and legal and all that, and we're not making a value judgment. Like, the debate that we're having is not whether it's good or bad. It's not whether it should be used. It's just whether it is an invasion of privacy. And so to go back to our two kind of like main points that we're trying to hammer home, as Lauren said, we're trying to show that yes, fMRI can reveal significant relevant data about somebody. You listed all of the interesting, or Jacob said, grand things that it can tell. And then, yes, secondary to this, obtaining this information about somebody is an invasion of privacy. We're not saying whether it's good or bad, we're just saying you know something about someone that you wouldn't have otherwise known, that wasn't otherwise readily apparent. If you take a legal dictionary and look up invasion of privacy, it's an intrusion into the personal life of another. And typically you consider home, computer, family, work, school to be this private realm, this personal life. And I don't know of anybody who would say that your thoughts and how your brain works wouldn't be included in that. So now that we have fMRI and we can access these, we have to redefine what freedom of thought means. And this is also something that you guys brought up, that we have these amendments to protect against invasion of privacy, which kind of implicitly means that you're saying fMRI is an invasion of privacy if we need these protections against it. So specifically you have the Fifth Amendment, which lets you refrain from speaking at all. With an fMRI, someone can bypass that and look at your brain, the patterns of activation in your brain. Also, this was a big one you guys talked about, the Fourth Amendment, providing protection from seizures. So an interesting thing is you talk about wiretapping. So you can have a wiretap that is on the wire that's not over somebody's property, and that's okay. But if you tap the wire inside someone's home, that's not okay. Similarly, if you think about an fMRI, it's not an invasive procedure. You can obtain these scans without going into somebody. So I read a paper that talked about, well, could fMRI be similar to wiretapping? Could you be picking up these signals that are detectable outside of the person's body? And so maybe they would be considered legal searches. So I'm not saying that they are or not, it's just an issue that needs to be considered. Fourth Amendment also provides a reasonable expectation of privacy, but you have to consider how much privacy can be expected for people where it's really difficult to get this informed consent. So how am I doing on time? So one issue is, what about somebody with locked-in syndrome, where they're fully conscious and cognitively okay, but they have no physical motor means of communicating with the outside world? There are studies showing where they can use scans and use different activation patterns to tell, as a way for that person to communicate a yes or no answer. So you can ask this person a yes or no question, they can think of a red ball for yes and like running for no, and those would have different activation patterns, and it's a means to communicate, which is great, but you can't get informed consent until you're already doing the scan and talking with the person. There's also considerations to make with people in a minimally conscious state. If you can even get a reaction from them, how valid is this informed consent? You don't know how functional, how their cognitive function is. And then you also need to consider groups such as kids and people with cognitive impairments who you have a guardian that provides their informed consent for them. And we're not saying whether this is good or bad. We're just saying that using fMRI with these people is an invasion of privacy, and we need to consider these issues. Okay, just a minute.
So the task that's presented before the team in support of this particular statement is to redefine fMRI. And it's a very difficult issue because what we've seen thus far is that fMRI does have a variety of uses, most of which, as we've agreed upon, are for the benefit of humanity. And so it's very difficult to then be able to stand up in front of one's peers in science, the lay community, and state fMRI represents an invasion of privacy. How can you do that when it has such a wide range of uses? It's myopically focusing the attention of individuals within here on that particular focus of fMRI, which, as we've seen, is on the outskirts of its many and varied uses. So it's a very difficult task. It's a very difficult task to try to redefine a tool in such a manner and label it as an invasion of privacy. The group in support has made a number of statements about when fMRI can be used in these ancillary processes that look at incidental findings. I think that's an important point, because as researchers, yes, we are interested in all things that happen. And it's interesting not just because of our perspective as researchers, but also because the community that we are for the benefit of vests in us that responsibility to do what is appropriate for the community. So there's that back and forth kind of mentality. We are for finding out new things. The community is for supporting us in those findings. So when, as has been discussed, when we find such things that are new and novel, the types of activity that underlies certain brain behaviors, the type of activity that underlies our basic humanity, when we find these things, yeah, it's very important that we share this research. We shouldn't be afraid of that. We shouldn't be afraid of finding out who we are as individuals. And as an elephant in the room, I think that that's something that should be pointed out, that we shouldn't be afraid about finding new findings. Now let's look at what happens in a research setting when these incidental findings are indeed found. At the outset of it, we have to go through an institutional review board that has, through the Belmont Report, established a set of ethics that guides our research. These ethics include the right of individuals to be considered volitionally acting individuals with their own character, their own wants, and their own desires. They're given the knowledge of everything that will happen within this particular research project, including the fact that information on the fMRI is not specific to the types of research questions that are of interest at that particular point in time. They know that that's happening. It's their right to decide whether or not to participate. Much like with an individual who asks their children to engage in an fMRI, it's the right of the parent as the guardian of the child to make that decision about the health effects to be known of the child, the health to be known of the child. It's the right of the parent to make those decisions. And, well, I mean, maybe that's just an aside, but there we have it. It's the right of individuals to know what they're getting into, and we've specified those things in the ethics that undergird our society. I don't think it's an erroneous point to make the distinction that what we consider to be invasions of privacy are widely and universally considered. I don't think that it's an erroneous point to say that what can be called an invasion of privacy is also ingrained in the laws that undergird our society. If a single individual decides that for him or her, one thing or another, whether it be, I don't know, if a single person decides that something that is outside of the legal definitions of invasion of privacy are for that person an invasion of privacy, they're on the outskirts, and it's up to them to change the law, to change the ethical tone, to change the way that people are talking about invasions of privacy. in order for it to be realized amongst the broad body of individuals that this particular thing, whatever it is indeed an invasion of privacy. I say that because we have established in many different forms what constitutes invasions of privacy, and those are the things that are held to be invasions of privacy. Those things that are held to be invasions of privacy are guarded for in the Bill of Rights, in the establishment of an IRB, in the establishment of HIPAA reports. These things are regulated, and those things that are outside of what are constituted as invasions of privacy are also regulated. If it were if it were 2002, before HIPAA was established, this conversation that we're having might be more relevant, but we have HIPAA regulations now. We have an IRB, we have the Bill of Rights. Invasions of privacy are well defined.
Brain imaging technology has created potential for powerful new ways to understand the working of the human brain, as well as concern about misusing the potential. The real challenges involve the use of the fMRI in therapy, in research in the intelligent setting, the court room, and the public realm. There's no doubt that fMRI can bring many therapeutic effects, but the discovery and disclosure of the incidental findings in neuroimaging research has been an ethical issue. First, what happens when a researcher see the potential health problem in the brain scan from a research subject? And do they have an obligation to tell the subject? And what that can be invasion of privacy? Even though the researcher may seek consent for such communication in the process of obtaining the subject's consent to participate in the research, alternatively, the researcher could re-identify the consent before the transmission. However, the communication, even with the identified, may be allowed under the state and federal privacy law because it is for the purpose of the potential treatment. We're not saying not use the fMRI, but the most important thing is whether the fMRI is used properly. The ethical is that who will be accessible to the incident finding researcher, physician, internal technician, but that the data may be in second data analysis through shared database. Even though your name is blank, but your information is still exposed. The danger of misinterpreting neuroimaging data may cause false positive report and the subsequent medical costs. So the unwell established managing and communicating policy for incident finding may lead to the invasion of privacy. The second concern is that the technology will be used prematurely for the lie detector. Not only limitation of the existing method to detect lie and verify truth cannot be solved right now, but also the sign of the consent form in the courtroom means that the people should explore their secret, which is guilty or not guilty, to public, and who can get access to the information, which is really associated with the judgment. For insurance, the protection cannot be perfect, so the invasion and exposure of the privacy is a big problem. If the technology developed to commercialization would remove fMRI be mandatory in all cases to review that once been propped, and if that can be developed, find its way into airport, courtrooms, stores, office, Olympics, or schools, when every client can say no to the government, when every student can say no to the school, and when every child can say no to their parents, apparently society has not been ready to come to a decision about the exposure of privacy before using technology becoming widespread. Therefore, so far, the misuse of the fMRI may still lead to the invasion of privacy.
Time to vote.
Now for Five. Okay. And against 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And undecided. So
swayed more people.
Yep.
I just there's one more sway vote. How did we end up on that?
Because more people came.
More people
Yeah,
came
he
in.
was late.
Hey, you don't count. What were you?
I was late.
What did you vote?
No, I wasn't here.
What
No, did you vote in the after?
I was against this time.
Oh. So then it would really. Alright.
One vote.
He was late, so he didn't have, yeah. Anybody have any thoughts?
Discussion? Comments? Thoughts? Jordan?
Wait, Jordan's up?
No,
You always have a comment.
No,
though.
she was being sleeping I hear better with my eyes closed.
Who doesn't?
So,
Beneath first.
A lot of the against sounded like, so I'm trying to parse through that. So it's a tool. fMRI is a tool, correct? It is a tool. And then your argument for why it's not an invasion of privacy involves fMRI and the procedures that it necessitates to make sure you don't invade privacy.
Yeah.
So the tool plus that is the reason you say fMRI, the tool, is not an invasion of privacy. That doesn't follow. You could so the argument you could make is that fMRI is not an invasion of privacy because all applications of it are not invasions of privacy. I mean that's an argument to make. I personally don't feel like that's a big thing. Search and seizures. There was a lot of analogies with that. I guess what I really wanted to cover was that first point, and then maybe I'll just stop there and we'll talk about that, I guess, or I could keep going forever.
With like what we were trying to do is like what if you define what invasion of privacy is as an intrusion? Like what do you think when you hear intrusion? What does intrusion how do you define an intrusion?
So
It's
and
something that's on-
but that's precisely what the argument was, because you can make the argument that in any case you're intruding. I'm intruding in your house when you invite me over. It's just then you say, okay, that intrusion was okay. So I mean that's sort of a semantics argument, but I feel like that was essentially what.
I don't think that's a semantics argument. I think that's like the actual definition of invasion of privacy.
So you think
if it's not
so
if
you
it's
only
not an intrusion, then it's not an invasion of privacy.
So if you invite me, then I'm not intruding on your house.
Exactly.
Even though I go to a room you tell me I shouldn't go to.
That's different.
Exactly. So there's that extra bit, right?
Then
So when I do a
invite you.
scan for an experiment, I will see all your rooms.
So by your same
And I need to tell you.
And we do. When you sign that thing, you hear that
You have to
see all
sign
your
that thing.
rooms.
You have to sign that thing in the first
That's
place.
the invitation.
But
The
that
tool-
doesn't mean that you won't invade someone's
You have to
privacy
sign the
by
thing.
thinking things about them and knowing things about the brain, not seeing.
No, but
There are
But if
protections
invasion of
for a
privacy
reason.
is an
There are
intrusion,
protections
that
for a
means,
reason.
That means like I didn't allow
But
that.
If
we're
there's
not
nothing to
really
protect
arguing-
against, why do you have protections?
We're not really arguing about the fact that the invasion is seeing something, so that you're telling the patient they're going to see your whole brain. It's that as a scientist, you see activation in this brain area and think, oh, I wonder why this brain area is
just
activated.
wanna,
That's an invasion
get a
into
question
someone's
in.
thoughts.
So
That's
Invasions
not an
into
invasion
thoughts.
though. It's
by
like
the
you've
same
already given access to
I want to
it.
ask you, by
But
your
not to,
same
like, your innermost
thought process, you're saying that a camera is an invasion of privacy.
It is.
All right, and a person is an invasion of privacy.
Oh, what?
A person who is invited into a house and then goes into a different room.
I'm not.
A person is an invasion.
I'm saying
of
this
privacy.
is a definition. This
invader
is
of
not
privacy.
the definition because there's no such thing as
I mean,
the
you're saying that
definition.
Melanie, like,
anything
really
that
wants
can
to talk.
record any information, anything that records information is an invasion of privacy.
No, it depends on the scope of what it's able
Anything
to
that
record.
records information outside of a defined boundary is an invasion of privacy.
If it involves yeah, absolutely.
And
if it involves
so the idea of invasions of privacy being established by society and having these guidelines that are set in order to regulate the specific uses of a thing,
Yeah.
don't then, for you, establish the boundaries of use of a particular tool to those things that are not invading privacy.
Exactly. You have to limit that tool to an area where it doesn't invade.
so-
The tool itself
right.
has the
So
capability of invading.
You're saying
privacy.
the tool and its uses are separate from each other. And then the tool
They're very
that is simply there without a user itself is or is not an invasion of privacy.
Maybe
The
I should
tool-
rephrase.
the tool
and the
tool that is
implementation.
not used is also an invasion of
The
privacy.
tool and the implementation is different than the tool and the uses. The uses are its entire, it's spanning its uses. The implementation is the legal considerations come into the picture. All these
So
other
The
considerations
tool
come into
alone,
the picture.
though.
That was
that's
our
what-
that was our point. The tool
The
and its
tool
uses
alone.
Tool
are
alone is-
together. The tool is used in such a way that it does not invade privacy.
Hold on, say that again.
The tool is used in such a way such that it does not invade privacy.
If it, you're saying statements.
Let's move
You're saying
on.
non
Right,
sequitur.
right. Well, I'm saying the tool is
I choose no.
the tool has been specified for uses that do not invade privacy.
Okay,
It is used for things that do not
Okay,
invade
this
privacy.
one.
Yeah, wait a bit, move on.
More like a confusion. This whole like incidental findings thing, like I'm confused how that would be different from, for example, like a surgeon opening your stomach up for like the purposes of removing a polyp
It
and
is
then
different.
finds like whatever, something else wrong with you that he totally wasn't.
Well,
expecting.
That
the
is also
difference
an
is-
invasion of privacy.
Yeah.
Well, it is an invasion.
Yeah, I'd
It's
say
acceptable.
that is, but the slight difference that I will make is that it's not always a doctor who's gonna then do something about what he finds, who's seeing your brain. It's a researcher or a technician who has to report to a doctor who then has to say, oh, what are we gonna do? And try to contact that person's doctor to then say, we found this thing in your brain. And sometimes it's not a thing that might be hurting them, so what does it
So you
matter?
would be fine with it if like the doctor himself was sitting there at the fMRI.
It just might be
doing the
different.
scan and looking at the brain.
So
I
then
don't
it wouldn't
say
be an
that
invasion
no,
of
I'm not saying
privacy?
it wouldn't be an invasion of privacy. I'm just saying it might be different because that person at least
Then
can
he gets up and
tell
goes to the
you.
bathroom, and for 5 minutes it is an invasion of privacy. And then he comes back and it's
No, I didn't say it wasn't an invasion of privacy.
That's how the legal system works, though.
So the only thing that would,
Go ahead, you can finish.
mollify like the individuals who are on the foresight is to say that at the outset, anybody who gets an MRI will also, their MRI scans will also be looked at for other things. If people said that, then it would be an invasion of privacy. If people said that and they agreed to it at the outset, it would be an invasion.
As long as it was all encompassing.
So that's in the IRB.
It almost,
That's-
yeah,
okay,
but those protections are there for a
Point-
reason.
One of our big points.
Otherwise,
If
you wouldn't
if
need
you
those
agree
protections.
to it,
But then it's not an
Good
invasion.
Lord.
You guys keep making a big deal about like, oh, it'll be confidential. There's all these rules.
No,
and
it's
I-
not
No,
just the
we're saying we're
confidentiality.
sitting at
It's
the
you
outset,
gave this
you-
information because you thought that we could get this and you understood what was there. So it's not an intrusion. It's not like we're coming in and like
agreed to
boom,
it.
we're
We're
like
dividing
it's not an invasion of your privacy.
But-
You've
okay.
given us
You
that.
go in with the
Like
understanding.
it's like you going and you giving someone and they're looking at it and you're invading my privacy. But you gave it to me, so it's not an invasion of privacy.
I think that invasion of privacy is seeing something that was not readily public and that is very private to someone. And we're not arguing whether it's right or wrong. Like, you guys are saying-
We're not arguing if it's right or wrong.
Sounds
No,
like
you're
you're arguing.
arguing a value judgment that invasion is bad, and that once you sign the waiver,
No, we're
it's
saying
okay.
We're not saying
I'm
that
just
it's bad.
saying
We're
that if you
defining
can
what
see
an
something that was
invasion
not
is.
readily available, was not public information before, we're not saying it's good or bad. We're just saying yes, that is an invasion of
Yeah,
privacy.
we're not saying that
No,
because you
we're
have an
not.
IRB, it doesn't make an invasion of
What is
privacy.
I don't think you can divorce the idea of like an invasion or intrusion from a moral judgment. Like the very definition implies that it's whoever's coming in, entering your house or whatever, it's unwanted. And if something's unwanted, that has a valence. Like you can't deny the fact that that is easily valenced by our society, like as a whole.
That you're like harming someone's rights, you're doing something like, they have the right to their privacy.
Subjective
Invasive
interpretation of what is
procedures aren't
unwanted.
necessarily
Yeah.
more, so you're saying that the definition of invasion intrinsically has a negative connotation associated with it?
I think
And
it
there are
has-
plenty of instances where that's not the case.
I think it
Yes, there are
necessarily
plenty of
implies
instances
that
where
it's unwanted, and if
Invasive surgery is not unwanted.
It is unwanted by.
Invasive surgeries in the brain that are needed are wanted by every party involved.
Nobody
I'm
wants
just-
the invasive.
I don't want this to be a semantics
Nobody
argument,
wants
but
the
if you want, like, if
It's
we're going
not.
a semantics road, then no, invasion does not have a negative connotation. It means something very specific.
I don't think she was saying necessarily negative, it's just it's a subjective, like, if
She said
Melanie showed up at my
morality.
house and walked in the door, I wouldn't consider that an invasion because I know her, but if my door was unlocked and somebody else walked in, like, I would consider that, like, kind of an invasion because I don't know them. She's just saying that it's a judgment call by necessity because you say some things would be an invasion and some things wouldn't based on, like, a sort of predefined set of opinions.
You're going one step further. I'm defining invasion with examples as just going into something.
So you're saying
Merely going into something,
saying
going into a new
someone's
domain.
house is an invasion.
It is an invasion, justified or not
No,
justified.
I guess it depends
There are
on-
cases of it.
I think it
I bring up
depends on
invasive
how you
surgery
define
again because the word invasive is used a lot in medicine, right?
Okay.
Surgeries can be invasive that everyone wants, the patient wants, the surgeon wants, every single person wants it.
Those are
It is
two
invasive
different-
because what
those
you're
are-
doing is you're
those are
going.
different definitions of the word invasive.
Exactly.
That's
So
not
why,
the
when you say
definition we're using here.
you're making that argument that that's not the word we're using here.
No,
I'm making the
invasive
argument that
and
we
the
are
term
using
no,
that word.
the definition of invasive that you just
Yes.
recalled, it means like internal, like you're actually opening up a
No,
body
it means
cavity.
no. It
Well,
means you're
like,
going
like,
into a new
so-
domain. You're going into a domain that is not yours, or you're going into something. You're crossing a boundary.
No,
is what I'm-
surgeries
that's
that
that's the
aren't
definition of invasive.
That aren't considered invasive.
That's
Can
a
we get-
definition
Can
of
we get
invasive.
a dictionary definition?
I'm about to.
Like, I want like all 6 listed.
I think like what Benita just said, like the way he's defining invasion and the way another person would, I guess that could depend, like.
That's
but
not what the
but
argument's
the
about.
definition of invasion, like, it wouldn't necessarily be an invasion
I
of
think,
privacy.
you can easily look at invasive surgery as its own unique thing with the definition. An invasive surgery and something invasive are distinct from each other. An invasive surgery is a surgery that involves an invasive procedure. People want the surgery, and they're willing to take the risk of the invasion.
Can I?
Because
You're
you're
talking
talking
about
about
what
what
many
people,
people-
I'm sorry, can I just, this entire argument that we didn't want to turn into a semantics argument, but are anyway. Something is an invasive surgery, it is still invading the organ that you're performing the surgery on. So something is, you're going into that much detail, you are, right? Something is being invaded, there's a boundary that you're crossing that you don't want to cross. Technically.
Yeah, that's what I think.
That
it's
is what
still-
Melanie's trying to
I think
say.
it's possible. I don't know anything about it, but I think it's possible that term invasive got applied to invasive surgery because like there is a harm to your tissues. You're disrupting the homeostasis of your body by doing this. So from the perspective of your tissues and your body, I think it could be
The
considered
only thing
unwanted.
I was arguing, you're conflating my argument with something else, is that invasion, you said invasion does necessitate, there's a direct link between invasion and negative, morally or negative.
Unwanted, that is the word.
Unwanted.
Unwanted,
Not
unwanted is the word you used, absolutely. And I'm arguing against that, and I believe I've already argued well against
We looked up the legal definition of invasion of privacy before we got here, and it was intrusion into the personal life of another.
What is intrusion? What's the definition of intrusion?
Intrusion has a negative connotation.
Well, I feel like our biggest argument was not that you shouldn't use fMRI or that
We're not
there
saying
are,
that.
or
You
I
keep
just
picking the
to the
uses of
okay,
it.
seriously, or that there's not informed consent. There is, but who can argue that someone knowing your innermost thoughts is not an invasion of privacy? We're not saying invasion of privacy is a bad thing or a good thing. We're just saying it is invading your privacy. Your thoughts.
If you agree to getting a scan, you are agreeing to allow this person to look at this information.
So they're no longer invading.
So, and if you still believe that it is an invasion, then what must be done in the internal review board process in order to give people, all the information that they need to willingly subject themselves to all that can happen within an fMRI? Does the process of internal review board, by your standards, for those of you who believe that it
Yeah,
is
what
still
about
an
people
invasion
with
of
minimal
privacy?
consciousness that are getting a scan? What about those
Who have
ways for people to
representation.
consent for that.
Right.
But you're in a vegetative state. How are you getting your permission to be scanned?
Okay, all right. So
We're
is
just talking
that
about that person's privacy.
is that your
Now
only?
you're-
Hold
now you're
on.
bringing up the
Hold on.
use in terms
Is
of
that your
you're
only
bringing it
concern?
in.
That type of person, or are there other legitimate concerns that you still have about fMRI being used as an invasion of privacy? Because if so, then the uses of fMRI must be further defined.
I really think whoever brought it up before is we're really just arguing about the tone of invasive. Like, I think
that's all we're
tone
debating
of
right now.
So if it's just the tone, then there really isn't an invasion of privacy per se.
Just because you keep saying the words doesn't make it any more true.
An intrusion or encroachment.
Yes.
So, okay, Benita.
What's up?
You're asking
No, okay. So it sounds like the argument that's being made, one of the arguments being made, is that because of the necessity to sign a waiver or the necessity to give consent, that means that without it, it's inherently an invasion of privacy. Is that what you're saying?
Not
so
because it's indicative of.
Okay.
That's
So like, by that logic, by that reasoning, that means that like a blood draw, because it requires a consent form, is an invasion of privacy.
It is.
But without an agent, without a person, without someone upon which it's like the procedure is being acted upon, how can it be an invasion of privacy? Because privacy, the concept of privacy, requires a human agent to be there. And by divorcing the two, the human agent from the tool or the procedure, it's like it doesn't even qualify as privacy or not privacy.
I think that angle of argument is disingenuous. Like the tool itself.
Tell me
the
how.
tool itself is just a tool. It's just a thing. How can it be?
This is the tool itself.
When it
That's
says
exactly
fMRI, it means a very specific thing. It means an agent using fMRI to do something.
Right, but you just said that like the technique itself or the tool itself is an invasion of privacy because it necessitates
It
a waiver.
represents an invasion of
The against group brought the fact up a few times.
Are
that
there
it's
still
just a tool.
uses
That's
of
my, I don't
fMRI
think
that
that's
constitute an invasion of privacy? I don't think that that's been established. Are there still
But that's
uses?
not the question.
It exactly is the question. If we're identifying fMRI as the tool and its uses, are there
The
still
question
uses of the tool
is
fMRI?
and it's
We
representative
all right, so
privacy. You guys said we have these amendments and stuff and rules because
I'm not saying fMRI is just a tool.
That's what
By
we're
the way.
saying, the tool and the person, and so that's.
I'm not talking about Paul has a question. That's not my argument.
All right. So are there still uses of fMRI that constitute an invasion of privacy? I don't
The
think
question isn't, are there uses
not what
of
it's saying.
fMRI?
You're the TAs, make your voice heard.
Yeah.
So, yes, there are court-ordered fMRI stuff for, all courtroom fMRI usage. Just like, hold on, wait, let me finish, and then I'm going to end it with this, because we're going to move on to the next group.
I disagree with that.
Hold on, wait a second, let me finish, all right? No, it's me speaking. Do you understand that? Thank you. There will be an entire symposium next spring that is being put together talking about the uses of fMRI in the courtroom in which this debate can be continued further. And with that, the next group can go.